Do you want to know whether you and your boss will get along? Do you want to know whether your employee will be disciplined in his work or will just lose your money? Well, listen carefully, because you are about to find out. In my other videos, I often talk about how the sun signs are not useful to know someone's personality or how compatible two people are. But there is one very effective method of employing the sun signs as you know them, simply when was the person born. And that is the relationship between an employer and an employee, the worker and his boss. Every management position is signified by the sun, and as such, the position of the sun can tell you a lot about how a person will be able to function as either the worker or the boss. More importantly, it doesn't matter how you calculate your zodiac, whether it's the usual one that we use in our everyday lives that you can see in your horoscopes, in the newspaper, or whether it is the sidereal zodiac that is used in Vedic astrology, for example. The reason that it won't matter is very simple. Whether you use the tropical or the sidereal zodiac, they are both correct when it comes to the sun. You see, the tropical zodiac is the zodiac of the sun itself. It follows the sun's movement, so it will still give the same result. So how can you use the zodiac signs or the month a person was born in to know whether he will be compatible with someone else as an employer or an employee? The answer is actually quite simple, because all you need to know is the angle between the people's sun signs, or more correctly, the sun positions. It's not even the signs themselves that dictate the outcome. You see, certain angles will produce certain results when it comes to such a relationship. So let's say both the boss and the worker were born basically a few days apart. So their sun, the sun in each of their charts is basically the same position. Well, what happens then? Actually, this can be a constant battle between egos, because the sun is always battling for supremacy, and if it's in the same position, it can be a problem. It can be challenging in terms of authority, because the employer's authority can be perceived as equal to the employees. So in these situations, it's important that the employer is born before the employee, at least a few days before, so that it is the employee's sun that comes later. Now, why is this important? You see, in astrology there's the concept of the planet that comes before and the planet that comes after. Now, this is one of the most crucial aspects of these, the compatibility itself. You see, the person that needs to be in charge, his sun has to come before the sun of the person that is under his command. So, no matter where the employer's sun is, the employee's sun should be less than 180 degrees further away. If it is more than 180 degrees, it means that it is the employee who is closer to the employer than vice versa. This creates a situation where the employee has more ability to dictate what should be done and how to proceed than the employer. It means that the manager will be less in control than the worker. Now, this doesn't mean that it's a recipe for disaster. Sometimes you want more autonomy in your workers. So it's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, but it is something to take into consideration. The second part of the equation, which is what really makes the difference between a good employer-employee relationship and a bad one, is how the angle is formed between the two signs. Now, let's go over each possible angle and what it will represent. Let's say the two people are born a month apart, more or less. So they are each in the either previous or the following sign. Let's say Aries and Taurus, just to give an example. Now, if the employer is the Aries, the first sign, and the employee is the Taurus, what will happen is the employer will gain quite a lot from the employee, but the employee will have a hard time understanding the employer. Why is that? Because we are oblivious to what happens in the 12th house, and it creates a situation where the employer is situated in the 12th house from us. So again, the employee will have a hard time understanding the employer, but the employer will be very happy because the employee will bring him a lot of money or a lot of work done, basically.
Now, before I get flooded with questions like, well, I'm a Capricorn and my boss is a Pisces, what do I do now? You haven't mentioned those signs. You see, I did. As I mentioned, the important part is not whether you're this sign or that, it's the angle between the signs. In fact, you can discard the signs altogether. The months are enough. If you know how many months apart you were born, you will know how to correctly predict the relationship. And that's the whole point with the angles I mentioned. You see, if I say it's a 410 angle, it means that it's either 4 months after you or a 10 month after you that a person was born. That's the meaning of the angle. So you shouldn't be using the angles as only applying to Aries, Taurus, or some other sign. You should be using them as applying to every sign and even every month, because each month is a different sign. And in fact, you can discard the signs altogether in most cases, unless it's specifically a matter of who has the dominance by the sign itself, as in fire signs, earth signs, etc., but more on that later. So as you can see, you don't need to know anything about astrology, not even the signs' names. All you need to know is how many months apart you and your boss or you and your worker were born, and you can calculate the correct angle.
If it's the other way around, now it becomes a problem, because then it's a relationship where the employee gains a lot, but the employer actually loses money because of that employee. Or at the very least, the employee is not performing the majority of his tasks. So that is definitely something to avoid. Now, how about Aries and Gemini? As in, one is in the first sign and another is in the third. That becomes quite a different equation, because let's say the employer is the Aries and the employee is the Gemini. The employer will treat the employee as a little brother, and at the same time the employee is gaining quite a lot from the employer. So it's basically a perfect relationship between them, especially in terms of making money. And even if it's reverse, it's still worthwhile, because again, the employer gains a lot from the employee, and the employee, while not especially respectful of the employer, will have a very cordial relationship, so they will get along just fine. Now, let's take Aries and Cancer, as in the first sign and the fourth sign. This is a bit more difficult because it's more of a controlling relationship from one side and a motherly caretaking relationship from the other. Let's say that the employer is the Aries, and the employee is the Cancer. Well, the employer will constantly feel as if he needs to nurture the employee, take care of him, teach him. So not the perfect solution in terms of the positions. Now, the employee at the same time will feel as if he is constantly under surveillance, constantly being told what to do. And it's even worse if it's the other way around, as in the employee then has to take care of the employer, and the employer feels as if the employee has all the authority. How about Aries and Leo, or the first sign and the fifth sign? Well, now things become very interesting because it's a relationship of either a parent and a child or a teacher and a student. Then what happens is, let's say the employer is the Aries and the employee is the Leo. The employee will constantly be testing the boundaries of what he can do on the one hand, but he'll be very creative in his work, so it will be quite a good position on the one hand, but not a quiet one on the other. The employer will feel like he needs to constantly monitor what the employee does, but at the end of the day he will get a lot of work done and he will get more creativity out of him, so he can be very productive as an employee for the employer. So it's actually a good position, just not a very balanced one. Now, if it's the other way around, that the employee will teach the employer stuff and will be more like a counselor, more like a gray cardinal, if you will, which is actually quite fine, because at the end of the day, if the employee can give the employer useful information, then why not? On the negative side, yes, the employer might feel as if his authority is, well, lacking. As was mentioned before, if the angle is more than 180 degrees, then the employee gains more authority than the employer, and this can be seen in such a situation. Let's move on to Aries and Virgo, or the first sign and the sixth sign. Now, this angle is very problematic, to say the least. Now, it is problematic in every aspect of astrology, but in this case particularly. Now, if it's the employer that is the Aries and the employee that is the Virgo, the employer will constantly feel as if the employer is taking advantage of him, and the employer will constantly feel as if the employee is not performing his duties or is not up to the task. He will look down upon him. Now, if it's the other way around, then the employee will cause quite a few serious problems to the employer, and the employer is going to suffer quite a bit because of it. So this is not a good angle, unless the only situation where this angle can be good is if the relationship is not hierarchical, as in if we're talking about special agents and their handler. That can work out, but it's still a very problematic angle. And now we come to the most interesting position, the Aries and the Libra, the 1 and the 7 signs. Now, in classical terms, in astrology, this is the position of husband and wife, or two business partners. So obviously there's something going on with such a position, but it's very important in this particular case which signs it falls in, because as long as the employer is in the fire or earth signs, he can handle it. But if the employer is in the water or air signs, there is an imbalance in terms of the power. So it all comes down to the signs where it is falling. Now I'll briefly mention the signs as they relate to the employee-employer equation, or the relationship between them and how it will unfold. You see, if someone is an employer or a manager, someone who has authority over others, it is always better for them to have the sun in either a fire or an earth sign. These are the signs that impart more strength and stability to the sun, and as such, more authority. If we are talking about the employee, it goes the other way around, because if the employee has too much authority, it is far harder for him to take orders, to accept someone else's authority. So it's better for an employee to have a sun in either an air or a water sign. Now, if we are talking about the real world consequences, think about it this way. A sun in a water sign will be more emotional, less stable, and that's the worst thing you can see in a figure of authority, someone who is insecure in their own authority. If we are talking about someone who is an air sign, then he is far too egalitarian. He is unwilling to exert his own authority. He believes everyone is equal. And when it comes to the employee, well, if he is a fire sign, he's too hot-headed to be disciplined. So that can create quite a few problems. If we are talking about an employee with an earth sign, it's far better, because then he can be stable and can take orders, but he is a bit too stubborn to listen to authority without questioning it. Sometimes he will just refuse. So again, each position has its ups and its downs. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and if you wish to learn more about medical astrology and astrology in general, please check out my website. You'll find the link below. Thank you.